Hey, welcome. This is my presentation on assignment 6, the role of a software architect in agile development. So let's discuss what agile architecture means. It basically refers to how the architects in an enterprise, or you can also call them system architects, software architects, apply architectural practice in an agile software development environment. They're usually responsible for defining and maintaining the structure of the solution or the product and ensuring that there are minimal amount of unmet requirements. Uh, Usually bigger projects have multiple teams working on different sorts of systems, like subsystems, and the architect usually is either responsible for defining systems or architectural designs that help in the communication between these teams, or directly is involved as such. It is really important in Agile, the architecture and the role of a software architect, because if there's miscommunication between two teams, the end product could have a lot of unfixed bugs. And good architectural practices also help in not going over budget by useless implementation of different features that are not needed, and so on and so forth. Basically, in my own words, a good architect acts as the glue that holds together all the aspects of a project through considerate and careful planning. Now, emergent versus planned architecture. As the name suggests, emergent architecture follows no pre-existing plan, but rather, as the name suggests, emerges from existing architecture that has been in place before the project either began or is existing in form of some other company's project. And plan architecture is it's planned, and unlike emergent architecture, it is a result of deliberate and detailed long-term planning and design for making the system. Emergent architecture, the main difference between these two is that emergent architecture is change-driven. It adapts more and depends on external factors and the user requirements and user feedback. Plan-driven architecture usually follows a rather strict plan, rather like the waterfall. Next, in emergent, there's more and more room for innovation, obviously, because it's change-driven, it's dynamic in nature. And a planned architecture is more stable. It provides a more consistent design. Testing can be challenging in emergent architecture, obviously, because it's changing all the time. So writing unit tests, for example, is really, really difficult, and similarly in planned architecture, it's the opposite. Testing is really clear because there is a consistent plan in place and the architecture is well defined. Usually emergent architecture is really good for dynamic systems that need to keep changing. Like, for example, a good social media app, it'll need to change and adapt to what people want from it. And a great example of it is the internet. It was emergent. There wasn't a plan to make the internet. It was a result of the US Navy wanting to communicate between its posts. And when this was made public, the software for it, people just made networks upon networks upon networks, and they were made public eventually. And that's how we got the internet. Similarly, in planned architecture, it's really essential for static, long-term and large-scale projects, like, for example, a point-of-service terminal in shopping malls or something like space programs. It really needs a solid plan rather than dynamicity, because there isn't too much that can change. Like, for example, in hospitals, in MRI machines, there isn't variation in how the machine could operate, but rather the cases which it deals with. So there isn't a need for an emergent form of architecture. Now, for different scenarios, example scenarios are where emergent and planned architecture can be used. For emergent, you can consider continuous refactoring in XP. So if someone's following extreme programming as the paradigm for agile development, emergent architecture is the way to go. Why? Well, because refactoring is a process. It's not a well-defined process. It can vary from different teams to teams. It will be simple to use emergent architecture because of, obviously, the amount of variation that can happen, the dynamic nature of the process. The need for feedback loops is also really important, because if people cannot get feedback while doing XP, pair programming and stuff, well, they don't have much room for improvement, and the product subsequently produced will be subpar. And the last point is, well, emergent architecture allows for the practice of XP to be more iterative in nature, and thus, allows more room for the developers to actually integrate changes. Now, as for planned architecture, well, a simple example is building an e-commerce website or something like ATMs. Why planned? Because, well, for e-commerce websites, security is a great concern. Well, because there's money involved, obviously. It should be really scalable, because the more the amount of users that join the platform, the more scalable the system has to be, and it really needs to perform well to be able to compete with other competitors. It's a competitive market. Planned architecture is also important to follow in e-commerce websites, because it really enhances the user experience, as in it almost guarantees a smooth experience to the users. And last but not the least, it also means that there's room for future expansion without too much planning, because the core plan for the project is already in place. So it just needs to extend rather than plan everything and adapt to everything from the ground up. So what are the takeaways? Well, the takeaways for using, in general, emergent versus planned and software architecture in general, is that you need to understand if your project or the product needs a dynamic environment or a static environment. So it can be both emergent and planned, in Agile, but the flexibility allows Agile teams to adapt to changing requirements while ensuring robust system design. Similarly, in general, a software architect's role is evolving. So in an Agile setting, the role of an architect is not just about like designing systems, it's also to integrate everyone together in the process and to make sure that teams communicate with each other. Then there's also the fact that balance in this process is quite crucial, because if you're really strict about what kind of a development process and environment you follow, then it's highly likely that there'll be a lot of stress on the developers as well as the rest of the team members. Furthermore, it's really likely that your product will fail, because if you don't change your practices according to what's most optimal, the product fails because of like different things, different things going wrong. People fail, software fails, bugs, etc. Similarly, it's really important to have an architect in place, because agility without chaos is the way to success. If the software designing and the software production is too chaotic, it will just fall apart. People will not be able to communicate with each other in a standardized or systematic format. And here's the references. That's all for the presentation. Thank you, and bye-bye.